I'd just like to first acknowledge the First Peoples of this country, the Ngai peoples, including the Muttaburra clan, and pay respects to all their elders past and present. I'd also like to dedicate this little presentation to Doug Langdon, who actually discovered Muttaburrasaurus, langdoni, or langdoni in Latin, and Alan Bartholomew, who is the Queensland Museum's curator, who actually went and collected Muttaburrasaurus only about 8 kilometres from here, believe it or not, as the crow flies, and then named Muttaburrasaurus. But actually, before talking directly about Muttaburrasaurus, I'd like to just maybe cover something more about country, which is really, oh sorry, I'm kind of in the way. Yeah. Something that's actually really interesting. This is Broome. So this is the Dampier Peninsula, Pindan country, up at Broome, and people are surprised to learn that Australia and the Aboriginal people of Broome for millennia have actually had dinosaur fossils in their ancestral story, in their Dreamtime story and in the songline. So it's quite remarkable when you think about that these people, and this chap on the left is the Gallaraballoo lawman Richard Hunter. He's a fisherman, and that's actually his traditional spear. He's very good at it. And Louise Middleton on the right. And Louise actually worked with the Gallaraballoo people in Broome to save the Dampier coastline from industrialisation. There was going to be a big gas project. It was going to completely basically destroy all of these amazing dinosaur footprints along the coastline. But the interesting thing is, and this is Richard, he's showing me footprints of what we call dinosaurs. Scientifically we recognise as dinosaurs. You can see here this impression, I hope you can see it, he's kind of making the impression with his fingers, and there's another impression here. That's a 3-toed theropod dinosaur, a dinosaur called, well, we're not absolutely certain, but it was probably a Coelurosaur, something related to, say, Velociraptor, something much smaller than T-Rex, but perhaps related to T-Rex distantly. But the Gallaraballoo and their ancestors actually had these dinosaur footprints in their Dreamtime story. There you can see those footprints more clearly. And there's some much larger theropod footprints. This is something that might be kind of a small T-Rex size. And there are more footprints. It's an amazing place because this is a crampleway of giant sauropod dinosaurs. We're talking animals that are maybe 50 tonnes. Amazing. So it's like the mud has all been squashed out, and this is something a bit like a stegosaur. Very unusual in Australia. The only record we have are these footprints in Broome. But again, these footprints, and we're not absolutely certain how all of these footprints figured in the Dreamtime story, but what we do know is that the footprints are thought to have been created in the Dreamtime by Morala. Morala was the emu man, the lawmaker, the lawgiver, taught people right from wrong, how to be. And this is, of course, the Milky Way, and you can see the emu in the dark nebula. That's the head, the neck. So this is Morala. And those footprints were made by Morala. The other thing is, and I hope you can see this, but these are fronds of what we know to be Bennettitalian. They're a plant group that are kind of related to cycads. They're extinct. They went extinct at the end of the dinosaurs. But Morala, in the Dreamtime story, dropped his tail feathers, and they were preserved in the rock. So it's a kind of a collision, not a collision in a really nice way, of science and the Aboriginal culture, the Dreamtime story, because we know now that birds, so if you think about Morala as the emu spirit, the emu man, birds and dinosaurs are one in the same. So we now recognise birds as being in the theropod group of dinosaurs. So things like emus are actually within the group of dinosaurs related to T-Rex. So it's a pretty interesting combination of cultures coming together. Coming to Muttaburrasaurus, these rocks are about 135 million years old, Bruin. I just rattle that number off, but yeah, it's hard for us to get our head around, but as paleontologists and geologists we kind of rattle off these numbers, but when you really stop and think about it, how long have we been around as a species? Probably 180,000 years. Hominids, 2 million. So when you think about 135 million years ago, and dinosaurs were extremely successful, they lasted something like 160 million, and if you include birds in that, they're still around. So, wow, you know, highly successful. This is a big sauropod footprint, and here, stepping over the top of it, beautifully preserved, is an ornithopod, something like Muttaburrasaurus. So we know around 135 million years ago, there were ornithopod dinosaurs. These are the herbivorous, usually bipedal dinosaurs, were wandering around Australia 130 million years ago. And Muttaburrasaurus is probably in that line. So that brings me back to our part of the country, Muttaburrasaurus, and this whole interpretation centre is built around Muttaburrasaurus langdoni particularly. There have been 4 skeletons found. I'll just give you a little bit of the background. 100 million years ago, this is Australia, this is Antarctica, and Australia was joined at the hip to Antarctica. So there was a giant rift valley, and Australia and Antarctica were slowly spreading apart. So it was a spreading rift graben. But in that rift valley, it was land, and so there were rivers, lakes, and it was extremely fertile because along the border here, right down the eastern part of Australia, right down, this is an exaggeration, it's just my schematic, but there was a huge volcanic province, a volcanic arc and province extending down, and it was active, and there was sediment flowing westward from this volcanic system, and it was flowing into this rift valley, creating really fertile land for forests and at the time dinosaurs to thrive in. This rift valley lasted up until about 40 million years ago. So up until that time we had no southern ocean. So you can imagine Antarctica and Australia connected, there's no southern ocean, so there's no circumpolar current going around Antarctica. So the cold climate, or the polar ice caps that we have now, and of course we have winter where we have ice and glaciers and all of that. At this time there was no circumpolar current, and the world was much warmer because of it. Sea levels were higher. So the big thing is because the sea levels were higher, possibly 250 metres higher than at present, which is mind-boggling. And get this, you're standing in the inland sea here, you're standing where the bottom of the inland sea would have been. If you look around, if you drive and you look around the country, around here, and you look at rocks, you'll sometimes find shells. And some of these shells are really beautiful, pearly shells, you'll see bivalves, you might even find an ammonite, little gastropod snails, Some of the shell just looks like it was deposited there yesterday. Absolutely gorgeous. They were deposited at the bottom of this inland sea, so we're actually standing in it. If you look upwards and go, wow, the sea, the top of the ocean could have been 250 metres above. Although at the time when Muttaburrasaurus was deposited here, maybe 50 metres. So that's the thing, is that we had this inland sea and we had this volcanic debris coming down from this big volcanic system, and it was creating this incredible environment for dinosaurs to thrive in and to evolve further. The inland sea lasted for something like 40 million years. So there was a lot going on. It's a lost world, and here we are in this country, but can you imagine what it would have been like? It would have been wetter, there would have been forests, there would have been huge dinosaurs. That's why I love paleontology, basically. It kind of gets my head into a different place. It's time travel. So, about 98 million years ago, there was a dinosaur. It died somehow on land, and its body was maybe washed down a river or whatever, or it was on the coast, we're not really sure, but it was basically this large herbivorous dinosaur, and it got washed out into the inland sea. Probably a storm event. It carried the carcass out into the sea, and what we call a bloat and float. So, I mean, you see this in large cattle and ungulates in Africa. You know, there's a lot of examples of large-bodied animals being carried down river systems. As they decompose, they have the gases of decomposition and they bloat and actually float on the rivers. In this case, this carcass would have floated out into the inland sea. And at some point, the carcass would have exploded and popped, what I call pop and drop. So you had float and float, followed by pop and drop. And it fell down to the sea floor. And, in this you can see there are large marine reptiles. This inland sea had amazing marine reptiles, huge marine reptiles, big long-necked plesiosaurs, chronosaurs, all sorts of things, swimming around and eating carcasses. We find evidence in the bones of things that we find on the sea floor of tooth marks of some of these big marine reptiles. And eventually the carcass was buried deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, hundreds of metres deep, possibly a kilometre down. That much sediment was coming down from this volcanic system. And you might ask, well, where did that sediment go? Did it fill up the inland sea? Eventually it did, but there was a whole suite of plate tectonic processes that actually allowed the Australian plate in the eastern part of Australia to sink. I won't go into all of that detail because it's quite complex, but you can actually see some of that in the displays. There's a bit more information on the plate tectonic aspect. If you're really interested, come and ask me afterwards. So anyway, this carcass of this dinosaur sunk. It was buried, probably very quickly, to prevent its destruction on the sea floor. And there we go. That was 98 to 100 million years ago. And now we are 60 years ago, roughly. Yeah, in 1963, along comes Mr. Doug Langdon and his wife Pearl. I was really hoping that Pearl is with us. Doug unfortunately has passed away, but Pearl is with us, and she lives here in Muttaburra. But she broke her hip a little while ago, and she's convalescing, but she's doing well. I had hoped that she would see this, but anyway, she is still with us, and she is absolutely amazing. And this is Doug, and this is their pet cow. I'm just throwing this in Because what else do you use a Hills hoist for?
Yeah.
There's Doug and Pearl.
Yeah.
But the important thing about this shot, and Pearl gave me these shots, and I hope she doesn't mind me showing you this, but Doug knew his bones. He was a local butcher, so he knew cow bones. He knew what he was looking at. And then one day, early in 1963, the Thompson River had been in flood, and he was driving his cattle, because they were graziers, they had cattle, and he was driving his cattle across the Thompson River, and he got to the other side, and he noticed these lumps of rock sitting on the ground. Not like anything he'd really seen before. It was really unusual. These blocks seemed to have shapes of bones, and nobody had sort of picked that up before, but Doug noticed it, and he noticed one of the bones was looked like a thigh bone, and so he was intrigued, but it was really much bigger than any cow bone that he knew. So he actually collected a sample, took it home to Pearl and said, I found a monster, because the thigh bone was 1 metre long, like over 3 feet long. So that's what he said to Pearl. You can see that there, that shape there, that's the femur, that's the thigh bone. It's all broken into blocks, but you can sort of make it out. The bone is still in some of the limestone matrix. We call it matrix. This is the rock that surrounds the bone. So it's also called the host rock, and inside that is the fossil bone. And these, you can see that section there, that's hollow. Yeah, that's actually a tibia, I think. It might be the humerus, I can't quite tell. But you can see that is a limb bone. So all these blocks were laid out on the ground. Doug collected up a bit, and he also went out with his trusty camera. There's actually a picture of his camera behind you. There!
Yeah.
That's the very camera. Pearl actually still has it. It's a Bellows camera, and he went out and he took 5 really nice black and white photos. And they're the only photos that we have known of, except I'll get to that. He sent the sample of bones and he sent the photos down to Dr. Alan Bartholomew, who is the curator of geosciences at the Queensland Museum at the time. And Alan got back to Doug and said, you found something really important. We really want to come out and collect that. Hadn't seen anything like it before. So this is a really important discovery. And Alan really knew what was going on. He thought it might be a dinosaur. And Doug had the knowledge of, that this was something else. It wasn't just a large wombat or something. It might be something really important. A lot of insight to do that, because someone else might have just left it there, so it's great. And then something like, I don't know, was it 18 years later? Out comes the discovery. So it took that long, since 1963 to 1981, to actually describe Muttaburrasaurus. So this is the publication put out by Alan Bartholomew and Ralph Molnar. It took that long to really put everything together and work out what it was. In fact, at the old Queensland Museum, where everything went, it's the beautiful old big Queensland Museum. I don't know who's seen that building. Do you know it? Yeah. So there were the toilet block, the toilets, and they had trestle tables set up near the toilets, and they had all the bits of Muttaburrasaurus laid out on these trestle tables. And as people went to these are the workers, went to the toilets, went to the loos, on the way they would kind of like piece some bits together, just for a break.
Yeah.
And that's how Muttaburrasaurus kind of got put together, at least the fossil. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah, that's the skull in the publication. And you'll notice that this is an illustration of the skull. I'll just quickly show you the actual skull. There, this is the skull's in 2 main blocks. This is the snout, the muzzle. This has got the big lump on the top, the big bulbous muzzle. And this is the back part of the skull where the brain is in here. I will get to that. And that's the eye. This is the lower jaw. It's missing the bottom part. A lot of these fossils aren't always complete. In fact, mostly they're incomplete. But the thing is with this, it's quite a complete skull. And in Gondwana, so we're not just talking about Australia, but we're talking Africa, South America, India, Madagascar, New Zealand, Antarctica. This was one of the most complete dinosaur skulls known at the time. And it still is. So, I'll just go back. You can see that this is how the skull was presented in the original publication. That's all that could really be done at that time. There was no cutting edge technology available to these people when they described Muttaburrasaurus. So they didn't have access to medical CT scanning and sophisticated synchrotron scanning that we have now, or even light scanning. So they couldn't do a digital 3D model. I mean, computers were quite basic back then. So this is about as good as they could actually do in a publication. They could do a superficial drawing of the skull. Actually, after, I don't know if you've had a look around the centre yet, but over there is a 3D print of the actual skull. So that was a 3D print of a CT scan. And you can actually have a look at it, and it's a pretty faithful representation. So that's the skull. But no CT scanning available, and that's all they could do. And then all the missing bits were filled in. There's quite a lot of the actual, what we call the postcranium. The legs are there. There's one arm that's known. There's a few bits of ribs. There's a few bits of the vertebrae. The neck is quite complete. We're missing pretty well most of the tail. We've got one of the ilia. This is like the ilium there. It's a pelvic blade, if you like. So, and we've got both feet. So it's actually quite a complete skeleton. The missing bits were sculpted by the museum paleo sculptor, and casts were made, and several casts of the actual skeleton were produced, and they were sent to quite a few museums around Australia. There's actually one in the Queensland Museum, there's another one up at Hewenden, even in Japan. This one's in the Australian National Museum in Canberra. So that pretty much was what was done with Muttaburrasaurus. And there it sort of stopped. Then in 2019, the Muttaburra community and the Barcaldine Regional Council decided they needed to honour Muttaburrasaurus, the discovery of Mutt, and the history behind the discovery. And so they built this magnificent village. It's absolutely incredible. And it has won awards, and you can see why. It's just astounding. I was brought into the story because they needed someone with basically a paleontological background to curate all the displays. So I assisted with putting together these displays and all of the information presented here. The idea of these displays was that when you walk in here, you can just go, look around and go, I kind of get it. I can see what's going on. You know, it's quite visual, but you don't have to read lots of small text to actually understand. But if you want to, you can go and read the text because it will give you more information. So I was really fortunate and honoured to be brought in on this project, but I was also working on Muttaburrasaurus, on the original skeleton. And so it was really fortunate for me because I wanted to go and visit the original site where the skeleton was found. And my aim was to see if more was there. Because what happened in 1963, the Queensland Museum turned up, they collected everything lying on the surface. As I understand it, they didn't dig below the surface, they thought everything was there on the surface and they collected it methodically, and that was that. They didn't go back to the site again, wasn't reworked. So, during my work on the centre, I went down to the site. This is the head of geosciences at the Queensland Museum, Andrew Roosevelt, and we went down with actually people from the Muttaburra Community Association that were driving this project along, and the landowner allowed us to go down to the site and have a look around, which was just fantastic of him. But this is the site. This is ground zero, Muttaburrasaurus ground zero. You can see this tripod is set up and these rocks here, and there's barbed wire, of course, and there's, you know, bits of metal, and that's it. That's the site where Muttaburrasaurus was collected, we thought, and everybody thought. But I wanted to really find more of this. So this is Doug's photo in '63. You can see all the blocks laid out. See in the background here is this beautiful big coolabah tree. I was looking for that because I wanted to know that I was somewhere where it all was. And it might have all been collected. But if I could find that coolabah tree, I could find this spot and actually just start digging the ground and see if I could find more bones. Because we were missing bits. One thing that we were missing was the beak. We didn't have the beak, and the beak's really important because it tells us a lot about the behaviour and what Muttaburrasaurus probably ate. It also tells us a lot about the phylogenetic, the ancestral history of Muttaburrasaurus, believe it or not, can be also seen from the morphology or the anatomy of the beak. So we don't have that. So I was really keen to find that. Never been described. So that tree, I was looking for it, and no. No, that isn't the damn tree. I thought it was, but it's very similar, but that's much higher. The other thing about this you'll notice is it has a big scar, and scar trees is something that the Aboriginal inhabitants did. They often took the bark layer off and used it for, sometimes called shield, a shield tree. So it could have been a shield, it could have been a plate for eating off, don't know. Anyway, this is a distinctive bark slice off the tree there. This tree, it didn't have it, and also it's kind of stunted compared. So I didn't expect that would be the tree. I looked for logs, see, it was nowhere to be found, gone. Certainly not at the site that was marked, the original site, it wasn't there. Looked and looked and looked. In 2019 searched everywhere. A colleague and I, we just marched all up and down. Probably we went a kilometre both ways, just in case, you know. Even took Pearl down there, Pearl Langdon, to see if Pearl could remember anything. She went down there maybe once, maybe twice. That was it, back in 1963. Maybe one time afterwards. But she couldn't really remember anything about the site either. The country looks very much the same down there. Everything looks kind of similar. So anyway, that didn't work either. And along comes 2020. So I'm working on this wonderful centre, and I come out for a few days because I needed to do some more things here in the setup of it. Hadn't opened at that point. We were still actually designing the displays. And I thought, and this was February, so it was stinking hot. And I was out with the guy who was managing this project, and we drove out to the Mutt site to have a look around. And I walked to a spot I hadn't really looked before, and I noticed these things. And these are dinosaur bones. And they were just poking out of the black soil. I'd probably walked over this bit of ground back in 2019, didn't really notice. What I did find before this was I'd walked off into the bush and I picked up this block of sandstone, And I looked on it, and here is a little starfish called a brittle star, tiny little thing, about that big, and it looked like it had just crawled onto the rock and died, but that was its fossil preserved in the rock. And I picked up this little brittle star, and I was so amazed it was so perfectly preserved. So you've got a 98 million year old brittle star. And I was walking back to the car because Chris, who was out with me, he was suffering a bit from the heat, and it was also about to rain, and it was bloody humid, and so he was sitting in the car in the aircon, and I was coming back going, look at this is fantastic. He's like, oh. And then, of course, I was looking down at the rock. I was like, hang on a minute. I saw these things, and then I looked around, and there were more bits, and more bits, and more bits. And I yelled out, Chris, I think I found a dinosaur. Oh! And he jumps out of the car and comes flying over, and in the next couple of days, we collected probably 1,000 fragments. So we actually marked everything out. We made a map, and we actually had a drone, and we did drone mapping of the site, so it was all mapped, and then we collected all the bits and took them back to Brisbane. Fantastic. So we had this dinosaur discovery near Muttaburrasaurus, however, at least 300 metres from that site. So what was going on was this, a new dinosaur. There you go, that's me holding the top of an arm bone. So, was it the original Muttaburrasaurus skeleton? And the site that was marked 300 metres away, was that a decoy to show, to stop people coming and finding the site and maybe pilfering it? Whatever, we weren't sure. Or was this a completely new dinosaur? So both options were really exciting. So that was the question. And so February 2020 found this site. I immediately planned to come out as soon as possible. So around March, April, I planned to come out, and with some colleagues from the University of New England in Armidale in New South Wales. So I was a postdoctoral researcher there, and we had all this planned. And along came these guys. COVID struck. That sort of ended the plans, because we had no idea what was going to happen, of course, and everything went into lockdown. So I had this new dinosaur, possibly Muttaburrasaurus, ready to go, and it's like, you can't go anywhere. Couldn't go. But things eased off in Queensland, and eventually, a few months later, Queenslanders were allowed to travel around Queensland. We were kind of semi-out of lockdown. But of course, my colleagues at the University in New South Wales couldn't come. And the only people that could go were basically me and my partner Jan, who's standing at the back there. So we went out to the site. However, just before that, this is a really cool bit. So about a week or two before we were coming out, I get a call from Andrew Roosevelt at the Queensland Museum. He says, I think I've got something that you'll be quite interested in. And he said, I've got some photos. And you can see this is an old slide. It's got Muttaburrasaurus site, colour slide. This is Alan Bartholomew in 1963, took photos of the site, and they weren't known of. He died, all his collection went to his daughter, and his daughter realised, hey, this is really important, I'll send them on to the museum, and I was contacted, and this is one of the slides. Just amazing. So there is a slide of the museum truck. I'll blow it up for you. There we go. This looks like a different tree. It's not the same tree. There's the museum, faithful museum truck. This guy without a shirt on, he's the Queensland Museum entomologist Ted Dahms. And sitting next to him is Doug Langdon. So you can see these are all the blocks of Muttaburrasaurus all lying on the ground. There's also string lines, so there was a grid made up, so it was mapped. The site was mapped, but the map has never been produced, and we don't even know where it is, so that's gone. But there are photos here. There was about 5 photos like this before the skeleton was collected, and this beautiful but different coolabah tree sitting in the back. So this means that this photo was from a different angle than the photos originally taken by Doug Langdon. So would that be helpful? Well, as it happens, yes. That tree is this tree. 60 years later, it's no different. That's my truck. You, sorry. Didn't Canada too long. So you can tell I've tried to park the ute in a similar spot. So here are the bones of Muttaburrasaurus. This is this beautiful coolabah tree that you can see is still there. So the bones that we found are here. Just the same. So yes, this is the site of Muttaburrasaurus, which is just fantastic. So we dug and dug. We probably dug about a 20 metre square. We got down about that far. That's as far as we could actually get through that hard clay. We couldn't use machinery to excavate the site. Quite often at these sorts of sites you can bring in an excavator and actually excavate. But good thing we didn't, because all the bone bits, they're all fragments, we found through sieving. So every shovel load we would sieve, and we'd find small bits of bone. And then we would take those back to the CWA house here in Muttaburra, where we were, and we would wash all the bits. We'd go to the pub a few times, as you do. And we had 4 generations of the Langdons down at the site. Great, they were just so excited to see the actual site. Their dad and granddad and great-granddad had actually found Muttaburrasaurus. So, you can see these are some of the bits. Well, this is one of the bits that we found in the digging. These bits were found in 1963. They were in the collection of the Queensland Museum, but they weren't described. They didn't appear in any publication because, I don't know, they just described it and named the taxon, and then kind of that was it. That was the most important thing, and left it. You know, things move on and other projects come up, but this is the fragment there, and the thing is that I was able to connect these fragments to the original. So this puts that together, and there's actually another bit on the other side of this, and when I put all this together, it all clicks onto the original skull. So now I've got the whole lower jaw on one side. Never had before. So now, didn't even know how many teeth were in the lower jaw. Now we know exactly, it's 18 teeth in the lower jaw. So, you know, fantastic. The other thing about these small fragments is that we can CT scan them. High resolution synchrotron scanning. But before I show you something about that, this is one fragment of several that we found as part of the beak. So we actually found quite a bit of the beak, which was just amazing. That's what I was really looking for. I could let you on a little secret that Muttaburrasaurus actually had teeth in its beak. It was thought to be something like a duck-billed dinosaur with a toothless beak. You know, the hadrosaurs in North America, the duck-bills. Well, it wasn't. It had teeth. So quite startling. Unexpected. That's the CT scan of the skull. Use synchrotron scanning. That's down in Melbourne. That's one of the jaw fragments going through the synchrotron. You end up with really high powered, these are teeth. You can see the colouring here. What we do in this software, it's called segmentation software, it volume renders bones actually in 3D. So you actually look at a CT scan, which is an X-ray slice, and you colour in the bit that you want extracted digitally. It's like sculpting, but in flat planes. And so when you go through, methodically go through maybe 500 slices, you end up putting that together and you end up with a volume, a model in digital form. You can actually take that digital model as what we call a mesh, and you can send it to a printer, a 3D printer, and print the model. So you're actually removing the bones from the surrounding rock in this way. So this is the technology that we now have available. And this sort of software is available. In fact, the company in Canada that produced this particular software give it to researchers like me free. Whereas if you're in industry, it'd be like $15,000 US for that software. So this is great. It really helps. So in the end, that is now the skull of Muttaburrasaurus. There are all the bones that have been produced digitally. So that's a 3D digital model. What I'm going to do is play for you, not that, to be very precise here. So this is the back part of the skull. I'm actually removing the bones. This is part of the palate. This is all the brain case, it's all this part of the skull. It's the condyle where the neck would attach to. You can see the brain here is coming out. I'll tell you more about the brain, and it stops there. So this blue thing is the brain inside the bones of the skull. Except it's not actually the brain as in the soft tissue, but it's the mud that's actually filled in the gap where the brain was. So we call it an endocast. So this is actually rock that's actually formed the shape of the brain internally, which is pretty amazing to be able to see that. Because we can't obviously break the skull open and look inside. We actually have to do this digitally in this way. So the thing is, the shape of the brain, its structure, its size, and where its blood vessels are, this is its inner ear, so these are the ear canals. This is the part of the brain that actually senses smell. What we're able to do from this is actually tell how intelligent Muttaburrasaurus was. So we actually take the size of the brain and we compare it to body mass, and it actually gives us an estimate of intelligence. You get what's called an encephalization quotient, and it's a comparable gauge or guide to the intelligence levels of various animals, including us. So Mutt probably couldn't do calculus, but would have been very functional, but yeah, not a highly intelligent animal, but its senses would have been well evolved for what it needed for its environment, its ecology, particularly its ears, and this part here, which is the olfactory system. This is the sense of smell. And I'll actually tell you more about this. So that's the brain of Muttaburrasaurus. And there's a reconstruction of Muttaburrasaurus. So one thing the brain can tell us is, have we got any volunteers? Muttaburrasaurus volunteers? Someone? Come on. Great, I'll do it with you. We're going to do this together. Oh, Jan looks like a good Muttaburrasaurus. Okay, come on. Where? You want to fight with me, baby? Okay, one thing that we actually haven't really known is if Muttaburrasaurus actually walked on 4 legs like the big hadrosaurs, or whether Muttaburrasaurus mostly walked on 2 legs like Tyrannosaurus rex. So let's just walk on all 4s. See if we can do that.
Thank you.
Anybody that wants, yeah, you've got to put your fingers like that, and you've got to put those fingers out.
How many of them do you want? 3?
Yeah, 3.
Yeah?
You've got to walk on 3, and
okay.
now walk along.
Yeah.
Oh, one thing from the from the inner ear, we can actually see the cochlea. So I can measure the length of the cochlea. This is the hearing part of the ear. I can measure the length of that, and there's a calculation, and it tells me what frequencies Muttaburrasaurus could have heard. And they're low frequencies. They're not high like ours. They're kind of more grunts.
Is this a bass drum or is this?
It was very bass actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Like a good bass.
Okay, so look, you did a really good. No, we haven't finished.
Okay.
So that is us being quadrupedal. Four legs, or 2 arms and 2 legs, walking on all 4s. But I showed you those footprints in Broome, right? We have quite a lot of large ornithopod footprints from Broome, and small ones too. Lark Quarry has beautiful trackways of ornithopods, including the big tracks, which I think are actually related to Muttaburrasaurus. No handprints. So it sort of says, oh, Muttaburrasaurus was actually walking on its 2 hind legs, but we can't really prove it. But those ear canals tell us a lot, because the relative sizes of those canals tell us, believe it or not, if something was a biped or a quadruped. If you have one of the anterior canals being particularly large, it says that that canal was sending a really quick signal to the brain to adjust the neck and the head to allow for the motion of walking on 2 feet. Because walking on 2 legs is very unstable, and it wouldn't take much for you to fall over. And in the case of Muttaburrasaurus, might not have got up. So the ear canals tell us a lot about the posture and the way that animals move, including us. So let's have a go at now walking like this.
Oh, Graham, thank you. I just had a champagne before, you know.
All we need now is... I'm done. So look, this is pretty cool, because now we've actually got evidence in the anatomy to say Muttaburrasaurus probably walked like this. It probably got down on all 4s to do things near the ground like feed. But mostly it had to get away, it got up on its 2 hind legs and it moved quickly. So that's what I can tell from the brain. The other thing about the brain is, I showed you those things called the olfactory lobes, the sense of smell. They're particularly big. And I've also found in the snout structures that indicate that this snout was probably made for a really acute sense of smell. So the olfactory lobes, part in the brain connected with the sense of smell, and this big lump on the head is probably all to do with smell. So, putting it together, Muttaburrasaurus probably navigated through the sense of smell, maybe 3-dimensionally, so it would have been able to detect odours from different directions, and it may have actually helped it navigate through the environment. Could have smelt the right food to eat, could have smelt the predators, helped select a mate, whatever. But that's probably what that big snout did. So, that's kind of where I'm at in my research. It's been a wonderful time. Lovely to actually present this to you. I actually haven't really presented this to anyone yet, but the publication is very close to being submitted to a journal, so I thought, now's the time. Thanks everyone. By the way, this is a shot by a very good friend of ours called Dash Geiger. This was the Gulf of Carpentaria. So the inland sea, when it finally retreated, went northwards, and the Gulf of Carpentaria really you can think about as the remnant of the inland sea. The inland Eromanga Sea, that's the remnant. So if you go up to the Gulf and you look out there, you can go, This was once the inland sea, but this is what's left. The other cool thing is that I told you about the big volcanic range. So if you go to the Whitsunday Islands, that's what that is. So these are the remnants of the big volcanoes that had spread right down to Antarctica, really. This bit was kept with the continent of Australia. The rest of it spread off into the Pacific, became a land called Zealandia, and eventually that sunk below the ocean. It's like a kilometre below now, Zealandia. But New Zealand is kind of part of that. So New Zealand is part of the ancient volcanic system, stretched up and down. So go to the Whitsundays and think about it in those terms, and go to the Gulf and think about here's the inland sea, and it'll take you back, travel back in time. Thank you.